I was 67 years old when my daughter told me I had 30 minutes to pack my things and get out. Not 30 minutes to talk, not 30 minutes to understand what was happening, 30 minutes to disappear. My son-in-law stood behind her. In the hallway of the house my wife had left me. He had his arms crossed and his jaw set the way men do when they've already decided something and just need the paperwork to follow. My daughter wouldn't look directly at me. She kept her eyes on the window, on the backyard where the January snow was coming down in sheets across the fields. "There are debts, Dad," she said. "The house has to be sold to cover them. You knew this was coming." I hadn't known. That was the part that kept circling back on me as I stood there in the hall with my coat still on. I hadn't known. The house had been in my wife's family for 40 years. She'd left it to me in her will, clear and legal, notarized by a lawyer in Guelph the winter before she died. No mention of debts, no lien on the property that I'd ever been told about. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked. My daughter finally looked at me. "We can help you find something after." After. That single word was the cruelest thing she'd ever said to me. My son-in-law checked his watch. I went upstairs. I had a duffel bag I'd used for fishing trips up to Georgian Bay, back when my knees still cooperated. I filled it with 3 shirts, a pair of wool socks, my blood pressure medication, and a photograph from my nightstand. My wife and me the summer we bought a canoe together, standing in the driveway of this same house, grinning like idiots because we didn't know yet how fast time moved. At the bottom of my coat pocket I found $23.25. A 20, a toonie, a loonie, and a quarter. That was it. When I came downstairs, my son-in-law was standing at the front door. He didn't say anything, he just held it open. My daughter had moved to the kitchen. I could hear her running the tap. I stepped outside into the January cold. The door closed behind me. I heard the deadbolt engage, that small, precise click that said something had ended, and I stood on the front step with the snow coming down around me, and $23 in my pocket, and nowhere in this world to go. I walked for 3 hours before I stopped feeling my toes. This was Wellington County in January, which means the wind doesn't come at you from one direction. It cycles around and finds the gaps in your collar, the space between your glove and your cuff, the particular hollow at the back of your neck, the kind of cold that isn't weather so much as a decision the landscape has made about you personally. I walked through the small town center past the hardware store, and the post office, and the diner that had been closed since September. I walked past the Legion Hall and the curling club. I walked the way you walk when you have nowhere to be, not fast, not slow, just moving, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant understanding what had actually happened. A bulletin board outside the township municipal office stopped me. I don't know why I crossed the street toward it. Some automatic habit from years of paying attention to small printed things. The board had the usual items: community rink times, a lost dog poster, a reminder about blue box pickup. But near the bottom, behind a curled corner that had been flapping in the wind long enough to leave a permanent crease, there was a county notice. Tax sale of municipally held properties, minimum bids. I read the list slowly. Farm equipment, a rusted grain auger, 50 feet of agricultural tile pipe, and near the bottom, derelict residential property, Concession Road 7, deteriorated condition, as is no representations or warranties, minimum $25. I read it again. I had $23.25. I stood there in the dark with snow melting on the back of my neck, and I did the arithmetic that didn't work. 23.25 was not 25, but something about seeing that number, seeing that a building, a piece of land, a structure that could shelter a human being had been reduced to approximately what I had in my pocket, made something happen in my chest. Not hope. I was too cold and too old for hope. Recognition, maybe. The feeling of a strange coincidence, arranged directly in front of you. I noted the time and location of the sale. 2 days from now. The county office, 9 in the morning. I spent those 2 days at the library. The staff let me sit without asking questions, which is a specific kind of Canadian grace I've never stopped being grateful for. I found 25 cents in the coin return of the photocopier, which brought me to exactly $23.50. Still not enough. Then on the second afternoon, a patron returned a book, and left a toonie in the slot of the donation box by mistake, and the librarian behind the desk said to no one in particular that some days things just worked out. I took that as permission. $23.25, exactly what I needed. The morning of the tax sale, I arrived at the county clerk's office before they unlocked the doors. 4 other people were already waiting. A farmer with mud still on his boots despite the snow. A man in a real estate company jacket who kept checking his phone. A woman with a clipboard and the focused expression of someone buying on behalf of someone else. They glanced at me the way people glance at someone who doesn't quite fit the room. The clerk was a man in his 70s with reading glasses on a chain, and the deliberate manner of someone who'd been doing this job for decades and had seen every conceivable kind of desperation. He read through the list without ceremony. The grain auger went for $80. The tile pipe went to the farmer for $45. Then he looked down at his sheet and paused. Barely, just slightly. Derelict residential property, Concession Road 7, he read. As is condition. Minimum bid, $25. No one moved. The real estate agent looked at his phone. Do I have an opening bid? I raised my hand. Someone made a sound, not quite laughter, the polite version of it that people produce when they want to laugh but know they shouldn't. I heard it from 2 directions. I kept my hand up. $23.25, I said. It's what I have. The clerk looked at me over his reading glasses. He looked at the room. He looked at his sheet. Any other bids? Silence. He brought the gavel down. The sound of it moved through my body from my ears to my sternum. Sold. Come see me after. The deed was 2 pages. My signature looked like it belonged to someone else, the letters slightly larger than normal, the hand still unsteady from the cold. But the clerk pressed his seal into it and handed me my copy, and I walked out into the January morning as the legal owner of something I had not yet seen. I found it down a county road that turned to gravel 3 kilometers past the highway. Calling it a house was generous. The structure had been a farmhouse at some point. 1940s or 1950s based on the proportions, the style of the window casings. The roof had surrendered on the east side entirely. The porch was a tangle of rotted lumber. Every window was either cracked or missing. The walls were wood frame with old insole brick cladding on the exterior, most of it peeled away to expose the gray siding beneath. I walked through what had been the front door. It was lying flat on the ground now, like it had simply given up, and stood in the main room. Cold air poured through the gaps in the ceiling. The floor was partly gone, partly hard-packed earth, animal droppings in the corners. A section of interior wall had collapsed inward. I pressed my hand against the exterior wall where the insole brick had fallen away. Under my palm, solid 2x6 framing, old-growth spruce, dense and tight-grained. Not rotten, not yet. The bones were still there, waiting. I exhaled. My breath came out in a cloud and hung there for a moment. Okay, I said to the empty room. I had nowhere else to go. The first week was about surviving. I found water at a hand pump well on the property that still worked if you primed it right. I figured that out on the 3rd try, my hands so numb I could barely feel the handle. For food, I walked 4 kilometers to town on Tuesday evening, because there was a community supper at St. Andrew's that I'd seen posted at the library. No one asked why I was there. A woman in a yellow apron handed me shepherd's pie and a bun and a cup of coffee, and I sat with retired farmers and said very little, which seemed to be the expected thing. I didn't ask for more. She brought it anyway. During the days I worked, I had no tools except what I found in the collapsed barn at the edge of the property, a rusted claw hammer, still sound, an old draw knife, a handsaw with 3 broken teeth that still cut if you went slowly. I used them to pull rotted sections of wall away, to clear debris, to nail salvaged boards over the worst of the roof gaps. My hands bled. My back ached in a way that was new and specific, deep in the lumbar, the kind of pain that reminds you of your age at every movement. I was 67 years old and I was doing what a 30-year-old would have found difficult. But I kept moving, because the work was the only thing between me and the particular despair of a man who has been made to feel as though his life has already ended. It was the hardware store owner who changed things. His name was Fergus. He was in his late 60s, built like a man who'd spent 40 years lifting things heavier than he should have, with a gray beard and the kind of steady eyes that come from a lifetime of sizing things up accurately. He pulled up in a pickup truck one Thursday morning and sat there a moment looking at the property before climbing out. "Heard there was someone out here," he said. "Word travels," I said. "Always does in a small township." He walked around to the bed of the truck. It was loaded with materials, rolls of building wrap, a box of coated screws, salvaged 2x4s, sheets of polyvapor barrier. "My father built houses," Fergus said. "Taught me the trade before I took over the store. These are from the back of the shop. Overstock, damaged goods, stuff that's been sitting." He pulled a pair of work gloves from his coat pocket and held them out. "Thought you might need these first." I looked at the materials. I looked at him. "I can't pay you," I said. "I'm not asking you to." He lifted a roll of building wrap and handed it to me. "Come on, let's seal that north wall before the next system comes through." Fergus came 3 mornings a week after that. He didn't talk much while we worked. He showed things by doing them. How to run building wrap so water couldn't wick back behind it. How to sister a new joist alongside a damaged one to restore the floor. How to read a wall for structural problems by the sound it made when you tapped it. His hands moved with the economy of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. "Your father was a carpenter," I said one afternoon. "Built half the houses in this township," Fergus said. "Depression-era stuff. He didn't know how to build things any other way except solid. He ran his thumb along a beam we'd just reinforced. He'd have liked this place. Good bones under all the damage." I thought about my own father, an electrician from Hamilton. What he'd have made of his son, 67 years old, and sleeping on salvaged foam under a roof with gaps in it. I decided he'd have said something dry and said nothing else, and then he'd have picked up a tool, because that was what his generation did with hard things. By mid-February, the north wall was tight. The main floor was stable. Fergus had brought a small propane heater from the store, a loaner, he said, and for the first time since January, the house was something close to warm. He came back on a Tuesday. I was working on the east wall when I heard the car. The engine was wrong for Fergus's truck, too smooth, too new. I came to the door and there was a dark SUV at the end of the lane, and my son-in-law was walking toward me across the snow. He was dressed the same as always. Good coat, leather gloves, the kind of casual put-together that takes effort to produce. He looked at the house the way you look at something you've already decided about. "You're actually living in this," he said. "What do you want?" I said. He reached into his coat and produced a document. He walked up and held it out. I took it. It was a deed transfer. The property, this property, Concession Road 7, the place I'd bought at the tax sale, being transferred to his name, and at the signature line for the transferring party. My signature, my handwriting, my particular way of forming the letters. Perfect. "I didn't sign this," I said. "You did," he said. "Back in December. You were upset. You said you didn't want it anymore." "I bought this property in January," I said, "after you and my daughter removed me from my wife's house." Something moved across his face, recalculation. "There's a separate line here," he said, recovering, "just confirming the transfer. Sign it and this is finished." I looked at the forged signature. I looked at him. "No," I said. I handed the papers back. His jaw tightened. "Don't be difficult about this." "Get off my property," I said. He stood there a moment. Then he put the papers in his coat and walked back to the SUV and drove away. I watched until his taillights disappeared around the curve in the road. That night I lay on my foam mat and looked at the ceiling and tried to understand the shape of what I was dealing with. One visit, one forged document, one attempt that had failed. That wasn't improvisation. That was preparation. Someone who'd had the document made in advance, who'd come with a specific expectation of how the conversation would go. I thought about the house my wife had left me, the will that had seemed so clear, the debts my daughter had cited, debts I'd never seen documentation for. And then I thought about something I'd pushed out of my mind for 2 years. Coming home one afternoon to find my son-in-law in my wife's study, going through the filing cabinet. He'd said he was looking for a utility bill. I had believed him because he was family, and I was the kind of man who trusted family by default. I called Fergus. He came back 3 days later. This time there was no pretense. He walked across the snow quickly, his face already flushed, and stopped 6 feet from me. "You're going to sign the transfer," he said. "Today." "I'm not," I said. "I've been managing this situation for 3 years," he said, his voice dropping into something flat and deliberate. 3 years of your wife treating me like I wasn't good enough for her family. 3 years of watching her arrange everything in your favor. This property through the tax roll, the registered accounts, all of it funneled away from where it should have gone. I'm the one who built a business. I'm the one who provides for your daughter. And your wife used her will as a weapon against me." He looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on him before, one that had no warmth in it at all. "I started moving things 3 years before she died. Small transfers, redirected correspondence. An account she didn't know about that I'd been drawing from her estate planning funds. By the time she passed, I'd already taken most of what I needed, but I miscalculated the house. She left it to you outright, and I couldn't touch it without your signature." He said it the way someone recites a set of facts, no shame, no hesitation. "So you fabricated debts," I said. "Enough to convince your daughter, yes. She believed me because she had no reason not to." He pulled out the document again. "Sign it, or this doesn't end well. These old buildings burn, old wiring, propane equipment not stored correctly. It happens in rural Ontario every winter. No one asks too many questions about an old man who wasn't careful." I looked at him for a long moment. "Get off my land," I said. He looked at me the way someone looks at something they've decided is already finished. Then he left. I called Fergus that evening and told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a pause. "You have the document he brought?" Fergus said. "I do. Keep it somewhere safe." I kept it inside the lining of my duffel bag. That night I slept badly and woke before 4 and lay there in the dark thinking about 3 years. 3 years of small, careful damage, every piece of bad luck I'd attributed to life, every door that had seemed to close on its own. The ice storm arrived on a Thursday night. Southern Ontario ice storms don't announce themselves the way blizzards do. They arrive as freezing rain, patient and methodical, coating every surface in clear ice, adding weight to branches and power lines until the lines come down, glazing the roads until they become something closer to rinks. The power went out across the township by 7 in the evening. By 9, the temperature was -18, with the wind chill, and the freezing rain had turned to something that rattled against the building wrap on the north wall like gravel. I was inside with the propane heater and 2 oil lamps when I heard it. A car horn, distant then not, then silence, which was worse. I put on every layer I had and went outside. The Concession Road had gone entirely glassy. In the ditch 40 meters down the road, a car had slid off and come to rest against the fence line. One headlight aimed up at the sky like a signal. I half walked, half slid down the road toward it. There were 3 of them inside. A man, his wife, and a boy of about 12 who was crying quietly in the back seat. Both passenger side doors were jammed against the ditch bank. The man told me afterward they'd been there over an hour. His phone had no signal. His wife had a cut on her forehead from the window. The boy had gone very still, in the way children go still, when they've used up their fear and moved into something past it. Getting them back to the farmhouse was the hardest physical thing I've ever done. The road was impassable on foot, every step a controlled fall. I had a length of rope Fergus had left in the barn, and I stretched it between fence posts along the shoulder so we had something to hold. The woman could walk but was dazed. The man kept his arm around her. I carried the boy on my back for the last 50 meters, his arms around my neck, his weight nothing at all against the cold. Inside, I turned the heater as high as it would go. Fergus's wool blankets, the ones that smelled like a barn but held heat like nothing else. Soup I'd made that morning, heated on the camping stove. I handed it out and didn't say much because there was nothing to say that the warmth wasn't already saying better. The boy stopped shaking around midnight. His parents sat close to the heater, quiet, and I let the silence be what it needed to be. At some point, the father said, "You built all this yourself?" "With help," I said. He looked at the carefully repaired walls, the sister joists visible overhead, the oil lamps casting yellow light across old spruce timber that 2 months ago had been rot and shadow. He was quiet for a while. "What did this place cost you?" he asked. $23.25, I said. He looked at me steadily. "And before that?" I thought about it. "Everything," I said, "and nothing I actually needed." In the morning the storm had passed. I walked them to the road and flagged down the township plow that came through at 7. The man shook my hand for a long time without speaking. His wife hugged me carefully. The boy looked back at the farmhouse as they walked to the truck, and I saw in his face the particular expression of someone who has been surprised by what safety can look like. Word travels in a small township. By the following week, people had started coming. A woman brought a casserole. A retired electrician spent 2 days working on the panel without asking anything in return. A man named Yusuf, who was a neighbor of the family I'd rescued, came with his truck and helped me haul debris from the collapsed barn. He'd arrived from Ethiopia 15 years ago, he told me, and he knew something about building a life from nearly nothing in a country that was cold in more ways than one at first. We worked well together. We didn't need to explain much to each other. And 2 OPP officers came out with copies of the document my son-in-law had tried to have me sign. The man I'd carried through the ice storm. It turned out he worked in financial compliance for a firm in Guelph. He'd recognized the document type the moment I described it to him on the phone. 3 days after the storm, he'd made calls. The OPP had made several more. The investigation found the forged transfer. It found records of my son-in-law consulting a notary under false pretenses. It found, in his financial records, 3 years of transactions that should not have existed. Transfers, redirected estate planning correspondence. A shadow account that had been drawing down funds my wife had designated for her charitable bequests. The debts he'd used to remove me from my wife's house did not exist. He had fabricated them carefully enough that my daughter, who had trusted her husband completely, had genuinely believed they were real. She called me from outside the courthouse on the day he was charged. She didn't say much. I didn't say much either. Some conversations are too large for the words available to them. He was charged with fraud, forgery, and breach of trust. My daughter retained her own lawyer. The house my wife had left me was restored to my name through the courts. I didn't feel the triumph I'd expected to feel. I'd imagined some clean release of everything I'd been holding since that January afternoon. Instead, what I felt was quieter and harder to name. Something like the feeling at the end of a very long winter, when the temperature finally turns and you're not sure yet whether to trust it. Spring came to Wellington County the way it always does, grudgingly, in stages, with setbacks. A warm week in March, then snow in April. Then suddenly in the last week of April, something shifted. The fields around the farmhouse went from gray to brown to the particular tentative green of new growth. Birds came back. The hand pump well ran clear and cold. I finished the second bedroom in May. Simple. A cot, 2 wool blankets, a window that faced the road. A place where someone who needed shelter could sleep without being asked to explain themselves. Fergus came out the day I finished it and stood in the doorway looking at it. "What are you going to call this place?" he asked. I hadn't thought about it in those terms. "My father always said a house earns its name," Fergus said. "You can't give it one before it's ready." He looked at the room, then at me. "I think this one's ready." I thought about what the room was for. I thought about the boy I'd carried through the ice storm, about Yusuf and the hours we'd worked without needing to explain anything to each other, about the woman in the yellow apron who'd handed me a plate of shepherd's pie without asking a single question, about my wife, who had known, somehow, that I needed to own something in my own right. People still ask me what the lesson is. I understand why. They want it condensed into something portable, something they can carry away. They want the version that fits on a poster. Here is the truest thing I can tell you. I was 67 years old with $23.25, and I bought a building nobody wanted. Not because I had a plan, not because I was brave, not because I knew it would lead anywhere. I did it because it was the only thing in front of me that I could do something with, and doing something, anything, felt less like dying than the alternative. That's all it was at the start. That's all any of it was. Everything else, The months of work, the cold nights, Fergus and his father's tools, the family I pulled from the ice, the investigation that unwound 3 years of deliberate damage. None of it came from a strategy. It came from not giving up on one small, ridiculous decision made by a man who had $23 and nowhere to sleep. Everyone has a piece of land nobody else wants. Everyone has something that's been written off or sold at tax sale for next to nothing. It might not be a building. It might be a skill you let go quiet, a relationship you stopped believing in, or simply the understanding that your life still has space in it for something to grow. The question isn't whether it's worth fixing. The question is whether you're willing to show up in the cold and start. I keep a lamp in the window of the farmhouse now. It burns through the long winter evenings, visible from the road, a steady yellow light that marks the difference between absolute darkness and something else. Fergus noticed it first. He said people in the township had started referring to the property by something other than the Concession Road number. They called it the place with the light on. That seemed right to me. That seemed like enough.